Доброе утро, дамы и господа. Доброе утро, уважаемые коллеги. Меня зовут Владимир Чистюхин, я заместитель председателя Центрального банка Российской Федерации по вопросам регулирования и надзора за некредитными финансовыми организациями. Я надеюсь, что у всех наших иностранных коллег, которые не говорят на русском языке, работают службы перевода, и они могут воспользоваться соответствующими устройствами. Мне выпала большая честь открыть первый совместный семинар Банка России и Альянса за финансовую доступность по развитию цифровых финансовых услуг. И перед тем, как я скажу несколько своих собственных слов, я хотел бы зачитать приветствие участникам семинара по развитию финансовой доступности цифровых финансовых услуг от председателя Центрального банка Эльвиры Набиуллиной. Уважаемые коллеги, дамы и господа, приветствую вас на первом семинаре по развитию финансовой доступности и цифровых финансовых услуг, проводимом Центральным банком Российской Федерации совместно с Альянсом за финансовую доступность. В настоящее время обеспечение доступности к базовым финансовым услугам является приоритетом как для международных организаций, таких как Группа 20, Всемирный банк, Альянс за финансовую доступность, так и для Банка России. Роль цифровых финансовых услуг как инструмента повышения финансовой доступности нельзя недооценивать. Их внедрение делает финансовый сектор более доступным для населения и малого бизнеса, позволяет снизить использование наличных денежных средств и повысить прозрачность финансовой системы, обеспечивает широкий доступ не только к платежным сервисам, но и к базовым финансовым услугам, кредитам, сберегательным, инвестиционным. Безусловно, развитие цифровых финансовых услуг сопряжено с новыми вызовами, которые требуют адекватного регулирования. Уверен, что сегодняшняя встреча позволит ускорить выработку подходов, позволяющих эффективно решить эту задачу. Желаю всем участникам семинара успешной и плодотворной работы. Председатель Банка России Эльвира Набиуллина. Уважаемые коллеги, я хотел бы начать с того, что в этом году произошло очень важное событие для Банка России, я считаю, для всей Российской Федерации, для всей страны в целом. Банк России стал членом Альянса за финансовую доступность. Данное членство позволяет нам воспользоваться уникальной международной платформой, которую как раз и представляет данная организация по обмену опытом и внедрению лучших практик по обеспечению финансовой доступности. Задача обеспечения финансовой доступности касается не только развивающихся рынков, это тот вопрос, который сегодня стоит и перед развитыми странами. Именно эти страны сегодня пытаются за счет внедрения различных элементов финансовой доступности снизить издержки своих экономических агентов и таким образом сократить стоимость операций для конечного потребителя. Вопрос финансовой доступности, как это уже отмечалось в приветствии председателя Банка России, стоит сегодня на повестке дня многих международных организаций. Обеспечение финансовой доступности позволяет решить целый комплекс проблем. Я выделю только некоторые из них. Во-первых, обеспечение финансовой доступности позволяет снизить уровень функционирования альтернативных бесконтрольных финансовых систем, то есть то, что мы часто называем теневая банковская система. Обеспечение финансовой доступности позволяет внедрить прогрессивные инновационные технологии в традиционные финансовые сервисы. И, наконец, обеспечение финансовой доступности позволяет сократить наличный денежный оборот и внести свой вклад в борьбу с отмыванием денег и финансированием терроризма. Как уже отмечалось, одним из перспективных направлений развития финансовой доступности является внедрение цифровых финансовых услуг. Для проведения финансовых операций активно стали использоваться мобильные средства связи и интернет. Возникли такие понятия, как электронные деньги и мобильные платежи. Наиболее впечатляющих успехов внедрения инновационных технологий сегодня добились те страны, у которых были традиционно слабо развиты финансовые сервисы и банковские платформы. Развитые страны в целях сохранения конкурентоспособности должны сейчас предпринять серьезные усилия для восприятия новых форм финансовых услуг. Предполагается, что следующим шагом должно стать распространение цифровых финансовых услуг на все сегменты финансовой жизни, new digital services for all areas, that is crediting, saving, etc., etc. At the same time, the regulator and financial institutions have the challenge and the risks. We've got to see what risks we have with regard to financial inclusion. So this is the challenge which the regulators of all the countries should really consider. And in our seminar, apart from the experts of the Bank of Russia, we have representatives from the banks of different regulations. I'd like to welcome Stephen Vara, the representative of the National Bank of Kenya. Stephen, thank you very much for finding time to come to this event. We're also very happy that the representatives of the Alliance for Financial Inclusion not only found time to be present at the seminar, but also helped us a lot in organizing this event. And also I'd like to welcome Director for
У нас сегодня на семинаре присутствуют представители российских организаций, банков, GSMA-операторов, микрофинансовых организаций, платежных систем. Также мы пригласили наших иностранных коллег, Ассоциацию мобильных операторов, GSMA, Vodafone, Спасибо, коллеги, что нашли время быть сегодня с нами. Заканчивая свое вступительное слово, я бы хотел сказать, что присоединившись к Альянсу за финансовую доступность, Банк России также принял на себя обязательства по обеспечению финансовой доступности и развитию цифровых финансовых услуг в рамках подписания Декларации Мая. И сейчас я бы хотел передать слово первому заместителю председателя Банка России, курирующему направление финансовые рынки и, в частности, вопросы финансовой доступности, господину Сергею Швецову. Сергей, пожалуйста.
Владимир, спасибо. Я также приветствую всех участников семинара. Россия очень большая страна, и вовлеченность российского населения в финансовый сектор – это задача, сравнима с задачей, которую мы с вами решали, может быть, 100 лет назад. Это грамотность населения, причем не финансовая грамотность, а обычная грамотность, потому что способность человека читать книги, читать газеты, а теперь есть интернет, означает доступ его к информации, к полноценной жизни. Вот точно так же сегодня мы решаем задачу доступа нашего населения к полноте финансовых услуг, которая призвана сделать его человеком современного общества, имеющего больше возможностей, больше выбора, который он должен эффективно реализовывать. Хочу сказать, что эта тема действительно не уникальна только для России и только для больших стран. Она на повестке сегодня большой двадцатки, и этому вопросу финансовой доступности уделяется огромное внимание. Хочу сказать, что так же, как огонь может вас сжечь или может вас согреть также и финансовый рынок. Не все услуги, которые продаются населению, делают каждого человека счастливым. И очень важно не забывать, что финансовая доступность должна всегда рассматриваться в контексте еще двух не менее важных задач. Это защита прав потребителей и финансовая грамотность. Очень важно, чтобы услуги не просто были доступны, но чтобы потребитель мог ими пользоваться. Центральный банк Российской Федерации, который стал мегарегулятором год назад, как правопреемник комиссии по финансовому рынку, уделяет огромное внимание всем трем направлениям, и мы здесь имеем прозрачные планы, которые вместе с сообществом реализовываем. И хотел бы также сказать, что такое доступность в нашем понимании. Это не просто физическое присутствие в соседнем дворе офиса, где можно получить банковские услуги. Это означает еще и ценовую доступность. Очень важно, чтобы услуги были по карману нашему населению, потому что дорогая услуга создает ограничения по ее продаже. Но при этом затраты на распространение этой услуги остаются неизменными. В результате потребитель, пользующийся не массовой услугой, платит намного больше, причем продавец этой услуги не зарабатывает от этого большие деньги. Наша задача действительно расширять покрытие финансовыми услугами на территории нашей нашей страны, тем самым снижая издержки, которые несет инфраструктура на дистрибьюцию. Почему возникает вопрос электронных услуг? Именно потому, что сегодня технологии определяют финансовый рынок. Это было и раньше. Мы начинали, если помните, с золотых денег. Деньги печатались из драгоценных металлов. Потом придумали печатать их из меди, когда технологии печатания развелись до такой степени, что подделывать стало трудно. Потом появились бумажные деньги, появились мультипликаторы. Сейчас мы переживаем очередную революцию в области денег. Деньги становятся электронными, и не просто как остатки на счетах в банках, а в совершенно разных электронных кошельках, услуги, которые предоставляют различные провайдеры, в том числе телефонные компании. Это существенным образом изменяет задачи Центрального банка по поддержанию ценовой стабильности. Глобально Центральный банк отвечает за один очень важный вопрос. Его задача делать деньги деньгами. Что такое деньги деньгами? Это значит, что они должны обращаться, они должны стоить свою цену. И в условиях, когда появляется электронный рынок денег, Центральный банк также должен на это реагировать и также должен отслеживать эти тенденции, ограничивая бесконтрольный рост этих денежных средств, регулируя их стоимость. Хочу сказать, что Центральный банк вместе с тем, что приобрел статус мегарегулятора, решает сегодня в России очень важную задачу. Мы переходим к инфляционному таргетированию. Именно этот режим должен позволить нам контролировать стоимость денег, обеспечивать доверие населения к различным формам финансовых услуг, выраженных в российском рубле. Финансовый рынок – это место для инноваций. Это, наверное, самый конкурентный рынок сегодня на территории Российской Федерации, да и не только. Очень много институтов вовлечено в предоставление финансовых услуг. Очень много денег крутится в финансовой сфере. И, наверное, самые лучшие интеллектуальные ресурсы в силу высоких заработных плат сегодня собраны в финансовом секторе, по крайней мере, Российской Федерации. Это предопределяет готовность финансового сектора внедрять инновации, конкурировать, снижать стоимость своих услуг, переводить предоставление этих услуг и на безбумажный носитель, и на удаленный доступ. Сегодня в индустрии есть яркая тенденция того, что все больше и больше традиционные формы взаимодействия с населением уступают место новым инновационным формам. Мы недавно перешагнули рубеж, где количество наличных транзакций в Российской Федерации с наличными деньгами стало меньше 50%, и у нас транзакции с использованием безналичных расчетов, где задействовано население, превысило 50%. Это означает, что мы перешли через ментальный рубеж, говорящий о том, что наши наличные денежные средства – это все. Сегодня нет никакой любви у населения к использованию пластиковых карточек, безналичных расчетов, но хочу сказать, что это только начало пути. Пластиковая карточка все-таки это инструмент вчерашнего дня. Ни одна технология не может жить в финансовой сфере больше 20-30 лет. Пластиковые карточки примерно такой срок исполняется. И перед нами стоит задача смотреть в будущее, потому что инвестиции, которые мы делаем, должны делаться в правильной технологии, в правильном направлении. Поэтому сегодняшний семинар приоткроет для нас опыт других стран, которые, возможно, перешагнули даже через этап пластиковых карт, и покажет, а какие другие технологии есть на рынке и чем может воспользоваться Россия, развивая свою технологическую базу. Мы год назад запустили проект дигитализации финансового рынка. Была создана рабочая группа, которая выявила барьеры на пути распространения безбумажных технологий. Самый главный вывод, который сделала рабочая группа, заключается в том, что если в цепочке транзакций хоть в одном месте появляется бумажный носитель или требуется физическое присутствие человека в офисе, эффективность падает в разы. И практически нет смысла создавать технологии с прерыванием электронного сигнала. Поэтому наша задача действительно создавать STP-процессы, действительно исключать необходимость присутствия физического лица в любой момент предоставления финансовой услуги. Группа рабочая также выявила барьеры на пути использования безбумажных технологий. Это ментальные барьеры, это юридические барьеры, это технологические барьеры. И четвертый барьер тоже очень важный, это киберпреступность. Я хотел бы сказать здесь несколько слов.
And I'd like to say several things about that. All the history of money and financial services was followed by struggle with forged money. And this is the only article in the laws of the Russian Federation which presupposes very strict punishment. And traditionally, it was considered that printing false money undermines the foundation of the state. And today we've got to understand that cybercrime in today's world is just the same thing as printing false money. And it is not only punishment for cyber money. We've got to think of ways to make it difficult to commit such crimes. We've got to think of how to interact with providers. And if we do not achieve this goal, then the financial services will be discredited and it will be very difficult to win over the trust of the population. And for that matter, we think that was a very important goal and one of the top priorities. So now I'd like to give the floor to our moderator. Thank you very much, Sergey.
Ваше выступление, я думаю, теперь многим коллегам и в России, и за рубежом станет лучше понятно, чем занимается Банк России в сфере цифровых финансовых услуг, в сфере обеспечения финансовой доступности. В рамках нашей вводной сессии у нас еще два основных доклада, которые будут посвящены вопросу регулятивного и рыночного опыта по развитию цифровых финансовых услуг. Наша сессия длится до 10:35, и я надеюсь, что после всех выступлений у коллег в зале останется время на несколько вопросов к выступающим. Сейчас я хотел бы предоставить слово директору по правовым вопросам Альянса за финансовую доступность Джону Оуэнсу, который сделает презентацию на тему «Базовые подходы по развитию цифровых финансовых услуг, которые способствуют обеспечению финансовой доступности». John, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Governor. Доброе утро. I'm glad to be here back in Moscow after 28 years. I was here as a student in Moscow 28 years ago. And as I said this morning, this city is the one that has probably changed the most of any city I've been in the last 30 years. And you could all feel proud of the advancements that Russia has achieved. We have a beautiful city and a very progressive central bank. I'll proceed with my slides now. Basically, I'll explain a little bit about the Alliance for Financial Inclusion and then go into examples of why we see digital financial services as so important. As we can see, 2.5 billion adults around the world do not have access to formal financial services. Russia basically falls within the global average of about 50%, but we have a range from as low as 18% to, of course, in the high-income economies of 89%. And the goal is, of course, to move all those countries up. Next slide. This was the reason behind the Alliance for Financial Inclusion. We have spent the last 6 years building an alliance that brings together 120 central banks, ministries of finance, and other regulators from 95 countries around the world, all from BRICS and emerging markets. We work in 7 policy areas. One of the most important, of course, is digital financial services. We focus on supporting members to work together in a peer network to develop policy changes. And we have worked closely with the Central Bank of Russia as well over the years in the development of agent banking and other initiatives. We focus also on helping bring together the network to have better discussions on the global level with standard-setting bodies, with the G20, and with others. As a network, we also support a platform for public and private partnerships and dialogues, very much like this event today. And then the Maya declarations are basically commitments by governments, central banks, to obtain basically an objective target for financial inclusion. These are set by the different countries. So far we have 52 Maya commitments, including one recently from the Russian Federation. Next slide. All over the world now, we see the growing relevance of financial inclusion. It is no longer just a development concern, but a cornerstone of economic development work. As I mentioned, ministries of finance and central banks are including financial inclusion as a mandate to work on, together with stability and integrity, very much like the Central Bank of Russia. Financial inclusion is more understood in a broad framework. As mentioned before, it's not just about access, but it's also about usage and the quality of the financial services that are offered. Developed countries, I should say, are increasingly facing financial exclusion problems as well. And this is where, as mentioned this morning, we feel that the Alliance for Financial Inclusion, the examples from other countries, can also help developed countries in understanding so they don't get left behind. The G20 recognizes the benefits of financial inclusion for financial growth, stability, and integrity. Next slide. Technological innovation to reduce the cost, delivery, and increase access on a large scale is now possible in a way that we've never seen before. Proportionate financial sector policy and regulation is critical in enabling this. We see increased importance of access to data for better informed decision-making by policymakers. Again, this is something the Russian Federation has been investing in quite a bit. We also see the importance of quality aspects, consumer protection, which is becoming increasingly important, particularly as people for the first time become part and are included in the financial sector. We also see the importance of coordinated national strategies for financial inclusion. I think Russia has been held up as being one of the best performing countries in terms of developing a concerted national financial inclusion strategy. Next slide. There's a growing alignment of interest among governments, the private sector, and the global community. So we have opportunities that have never existed before. There's a greater understanding about the issues related to financial inclusion as well as information. We see the recognition of country-specific conditions that helps us in terms of, as a network, to learn from one another to see what is relevant in each country. You're never too big to learn from even the smallest country, and the smallest countries are never too small even to learn from the bigger countries. So we are seeing that the countries that have performed the best are the ones, I think, that are open to learning from others. For the first time, I think we're beginning as a network to see a better understanding of international standard-setting bodies toward the issues around financial inclusion. Previously, it was sort of a one-size-fits-all AML, CFT kind of guided, but now I think there's a better understanding that the risk of financial exclusion is actually more dangerous than the risk posed by many of the rules across the board that have been put in for AML and CFT. So there is now a better understanding of looking at proportionate risk and looking at a tiered approach to regulation. Technological innovation enabling the regulatory framework are driving these new digital financial service models that support financial inclusion. It requires a unique dialogue between the private sector and the public sector. Regulators, of course, play an important role, but they provide the enabling environment, but it's the private sector ultimately that provides this. Next slide. So we're moving beyond, in digital financial services, we see, the future now is at hand. We see that through digital financial services, we're able to provide a range of access features that have never been that the average person in many poor and emerging markets have never been able to do before. Many of us are used to using the internet, but for people who don't have access to the internet, and this again is a vast majority of people in many markets, the mobile technology is really changing. The development of e-money, electronic money, has made a substantial difference, particularly in a number of regions around the world. And, again, everybody has a mobile phone. Creating an electronic wallet that is linked, that is mobile-enabled, creates all kinds of opportunities. We see now in Kenya, where it started out in many ways as send money home, now access to all kinds of services, from solar power to water to utilities, kind of a prepaid utilities, which were not possible before. Of course, this brings down the costs of money transfers, remittances. It provides for businesses that couldn't accept digital payments before the opportunity to do so. And so basically we're seeing the benefits as providing not only access but also economic growth. Next slide. In digital financial services, we're looking primarily at three key models. These are e-money services, mobile financial services, and again, there's some overlap with the two, and then the use of agents. Next slide. We're going to, I think, skip the video, but I did have a video which I can give you the link to. Basically, it was just to show you a little bit about the people that are actually using these services. I think it's not just happening in Kenya, but we see it happening around the world. So I'm here to share some of those experiences and opportunities. I myself have been using e-money mobile wallet for 10 years. I was one of the first when we first started using it in the Philippines back in 2004, and I use it now every day, and I find the value in using it. I've probably registered over 25 mobile e-money services around the world, and I've talked with and met with hundreds and thousands of people. So we see that really this is creating tremendous opportunity. Next slide. One of the important things I think is now, originally we saw a lot of people moving in different ways. So you had plastic, you had e-money providers, you had banks, you had telecom companies. Everybody was kind of moving in different directions. And some of them parallel, some of them competing. But the reality is that by bringing everybody together and this convergence and interoperability, so that you've got mobile network operators, banks, e-money operators, and payment platforms all coming together and building on their core competencies, we can reach out to many more people than have ever been possible before. And there's things that both of them can help each other in doing by working together, as opposed to trying to compete. Next slide. As an example, and I'll leave Stephen to talk about this, we look back at where Kenya was back in 2006. Only 13% of the population actually had bank accounts, and nobody was using an e-money wallet then. Today, there are well over 24 million people in Kenya, and maybe the figure is even higher than that now, who have access to mobile money wallets, or mobile e-money wallets, I should say. But at the same time, the number of bank accounts have have grown dramatically from just 4 or 5 million to over 20 million. And much of that has been driven, and I'll show that in the next slide, based on linkage between banks and mobile e-money wallets. The next slide is on M-Shwari. Now, M-Shwari was a partnership between the Commercial Bank of Africa and M-Pesa, Vodafone, who's here with us today. The next slide. Basically, it's a very simple product that built on the mobile wallet. The bank had a very difficult time, of course, being able to reach out, and this is an excellent example where I think with the central bank taking into account that they could rely on the same proportionate risk regulations and allow for simplified bank accounts that could be opened very much the same way you could open up an e-money wallet remotely without requiring face-to-face and with relying on an agent. This bank went from literally 35,000 bank accounts to opening up over 7 million in a period of about 18 months. Never in the history of Africa have we seen a bank grow that quickly. They literally grew from kind of a, just a standard bank that was just working with the rich in the society to now becoming the second largest bank, and probably now very close to surpassing Equity Bank and becoming the first bank in terms of the number of people. They've also collected large amounts of deposits. Their loan balances have increased dramatically, again, providing basically very small loans and access to financial services in very small amounts, but they're beginning to increase in those amounts. I won't talk about it too much because I know we have Stephen here who can talk more. But this, I wanted to point this out because this is an excellent example where the regulators have allowed banks to rely on e-money, and that's where the two could work together. The bank was able to provide services that the mobile network operator and the e-money provider could never provide, which was a real savings service and real access to credit. At the same time, the bank could never reach this many people. It would be too expensive even to build or think of building an agent network on their own. So they could build on the agent network and the large number of e-money accounts that were already out there. So the convergence of the two was a tremendous opportunity. Next slide. In terms of developing a roadmap for mobile financial services, we have learned along the way that there are 6 important steps. I've written much about this and can provide linkages, so I won't go into too much detail, but basically it's looking at the customer perspective. You've got to start with the customer. It's not about how interesting something is and all the things you can do, but what is the real value proposition? What is the issue you're trying to solve? In some markets, it's very, very clear. In Kenya, it was very easy to introduce a basic financial service that allowed people to send money home. In Russia, you already have a very good and extensive remittance market, and some of the lowest costs for both domestic and international remittances. So the value proposition would be very different here in Russia, I believe, than you would see in a place like Kenya. So you have to look at basically what that is, and you would be looking at probably going much deeper into providing greater access to a range of financial services and possibly economic opportunities to transact and do virtual e-commerce, for example. The environment. You have an environment where people are quite literate already. They know how to use a phone. Most people, the literacy rate is much higher than we see in other countries. And you have a very open environment for looking at digital financial services. The regulatory issues, of course, what's allowed, what's not allowed, and sometimes it creates an opportunity to talk with the regulators, we find, to be able to see. In Kenya, they took a test and learn approach to allow the industry to move forward with the regulators kind of following very closely. So there were pilots that were allowed to continue, and the regulators quickly observed and made regulations kind of allowing innovation within the industry. So again, it's really about the regulators play an important role to both safeguard and provide stability flexibility, but also to provide that room for innovation. Then the institutional perspective. I've worked in countries with very small microfinance institutions that didn't have very sophisticated systems, and we looked at ways that we could use electronic money to better support these microfinance institutions, and I'll give that example in a little bit. Product development, again, it's really about testing the products, making sure you develop a product that meets people's needs, test it, and then really the launching is really about customer adoption, literacy, protection issues. Next slide. In terms of digital financial inclusion policy trends, we see, again, looking at innovation to reduce the cost of delivery and increase access on a large scale. We see proportionate financial sector policy and regulation is critical in enabling this. Next slide. The increased importance, as I mentioned before, of data to make policy decisions, quality aspects, again, the consumer protection, and then the coordinated national strategies we mentioned, as I mentioned before. Key regulatory policies, next slide, include reporting requirements that must be clear and focus on the information needed to assess whether service providers are sound, risk management protocols are effective, consumer protection policies are adequate in place and actually being worked on. Oftentimes, this requires making sure that there's some kind of an independent agency as well where consumers can go to. There is a role for the private sector, but also for regulators. Regulators also, we've seen, have to be careful to avoid excessive burdensome or overlapping requirements which may stifle innovation and limit market competition. So there's always a balancing act. Next slide. Again, we see risk management frameworks that are developing that have to focus on operations, liquidity, money laundering, anti-terrorist financing, consumer protection, public disclosure of information, outreach, and financial inclusion. Next slide. And again, as I talked about already, proportionate AML, CFT, tiered KYC regulations are becoming increasingly important. We have markets like the Philippines or Mexico as perfect examples where the regulators have allowed simplified bank accounts that are pretty much in line with e-money regulations, as in the case of the Philippines. Initially, they allowed e-money, and then they followed by allowing simplified bank accounts that could be opened the same way you open up a basic e-money account with the same regulations. So that made a big difference in terms of increasing access to banking services. E-money operator regulations are increasingly important. Remote account opening rules. What can you allow to allow somebody to open up remotely? This is increasingly important in Kenya. If they had not allowed the bank to be able to work with the mobile operator to open up accounts and for the banks to rely on the KYC process that had already been done by the e-money operator, we would not have seen 7 million bank accounts being opened in the case of Mshwari. And then agent regulations, and then things that regulators can do on interoperability. We are going to have two very important three, I should say, I think, from both the GSMA on experiences of interoperability and then from Kenya as well, and Ericsson about examples where we're seeing regulators are providing an enabling environment, and then the private sector is actually creating opportunities for interoperability. Next slide. Tanzania is an excellent example of where a enabling legal regulatory environment created a tremendous opportunity for outreach and a dramatic increase in access. There was a good partnership between the telecom regulator and the central bank. There was good encouragement between non-banks and banks so that basically they could work together. The government was also encouraged to take advantage of e-money services, again, from all kinds of services like paying small taxes. There was a good adoption of a national financial inclusion strategy, and then interoperability was considered as essential and one that was stressed so that right from the get-go, right from the start, I should say, as opposed to in Kenya, there was specific rule that did not allow for agent exclusivity. And so you saw a very different market developing in Tanzania in terms of access to e-money. Next slide. So this slide basically shows the difference between what's happened in a 4-year period where just a very small number of people had access to any kind of a bank or even a non-bank financial service back in 2009. It was about, for men, it was about a little over 16%, for women about 14%. Today, that's changed dramatically. Over 50% of the population have access to an e-money or banking account. The women and the men, it's now over 60%. Again, this was all due to regulations and innovations that we've seen in terms of mobile e-money in the country and partnerships between mobile e-money operators and businesses and banks. Next slide. Bangladesh is another important example where the central bank issued clear guidelines for mobile-enabled agent banking, the various allowable services, eligibility criteria for agents. Again, agents were able to remotely do the KYC to open up accounts, allowance for non-exclusivity in terms of the agreements of agents. They focused on risk and operational issues and consumer protection principles. We now have in a very short period of time over 150,000, and now I think it's even closer to 200,000 active agents and over 14 million registered clients, with half of these being active clients. Next slide. In the Philippines, we had challenges for small rural banks. These are community banks, basically microfinance-oriented banks that were having difficulties reaching into deep rural areas. These would be areas like your Kamchatka, for example. Philippines is an archipelago, very small islands, lots of remote areas. There were problems with how to reach out on a cost-effective way, avoid risks of robbery, theft. Much of the money was being transported either by the clients or by the bank. Next slide. The central bank in the Philippines allowed for, and this was at the time where mobile-enabled e-money was just being offered by a mobile network operator that opened up an e-money operation. The central bank allowed the rural banks to link to the e-money services and basically offer basic services. That meant clients could transact and deposit and withdraw money through their e-money accounts. They could access credit. They could access remittances, payrolls, even in remote areas. The central bank also allowed the Rural Bankers Association to develop sort of a blanket approach in partnership with the central bank so that each bank, instead of having to apply independently to the central bank, could basically just agree to a set of principles and standards. This allowed for over 70 rural banks with 1,100 banking units to very quickly become accredited and registered to the central bank and benefited over 300,000 rural clients who transacted over 400 million US dollars, or about 17 billion pesos, in mobile money-enabled banking transactions with the bank. And then my last example is from a small country, the Solomon Islands. Again, here's a country where the agent banking regulations became in place. They expanded the eligibility criteria for who could be an agent. They developed very, very clear tiered KYC regulations that made it very easy for small value bank accounts to be opened. There was a close dialogue between the private sector and the central bank. And of course, they see an ongoing need for financial literacy and the role of the private sector in leading that, again, with guidance and standards. So in the last 5 years, this is a country that went from 80% of the people without a bank account to 80% of the population now having access to banking services. There's a dramatic change in a very, very small country. Again, it was bank-led, but in close partnership between banks and telecom operators. So again, it's really about, it's not just, we're going to hear from Kenya, we're also going to hear from Peru and other markets. So it's not just a few places. This is really a global trend. So I think you're on the right track here. And this is one that I think holds a lot of promise for Russia, particularly with your mobile penetration, with the developments that have occurred within the market. And I think learning from everybody who's here, taking what you can learn from this opportunity and applying it in the Russian context, I think will be very important. So, spasiba. Thank you very much.
John, спасибо за всеобъемлющую презентацию.
For a very comprehensive presentation.
Мне кажется, ваша презентация
and I think that
и
your
все то, что вы рассказывали, в очередной раз очень четко показали, почему сегодня вопрос финансовой доступности является одним из ключевых вопросов многих международных организаций. Я хотел бы еще раз подчеркнуть, уважаемые коллеги, что Альянс за финансовую доступность предоставляет уникальную возможность многим странам обменяться опытом, понять, что нового происходит в сфере финансовой доступности и, наконец, сверить свои направления развития в области финансовой доступности с тем, что делается другими странами. Я уверен, что Россия будет продолжать быть активным участником данной платформы. Я уверен, что нам, с одной стороны, много есть чего рассказать о том, что мы делаем в области финансовой доступности и цифровых услуг в частности. С другой стороны, нам много есть чего подчеркнуть от наших коллег. И я уверен, что этот процесс будет долгим и плодотворным. Уважаемые дамы и господа, когда мы говорим о финансовой доступности, то зачастую мы должны понимать, что многие те решения, которые будут приниматься в области финансовой доступности, в области цифровых финансовых услуг, невозможно без законодательных изменений. И я очень рад приветствовать сегодня участие в семинаре представителей Федерального собрания Российской Федерации и Верхней и Нижней палаты. Во-первых, господина Николая Журавлева, заместителя председателя Комитета по бюджету и финансам Совета Федерации, и господина Виктора Климова, заместителя председателя Комитета по экономической политике Государственной Думы Российской Федерации. Мне кажется, что наличие в данном семинаре представителей нашего парламента, законодательной власти поможет нам лучше понимать те нужды, которые сегодня есть у нас в области финансовой доступности, с одной стороны, и с другой стороны, приобрести дополнительный международный опыт, то есть опыт того, как другие страны решают вопрос с финансовой доступностью. Спасибо, что вы участвуете в нашем семинаре. Развитие цифровых финансовых услуг сегодня невозможно без деятельности GSM-операторов. Когда мы говорим о цифровых финансовых услугах, сегодня мы говорим в первую очередь именно о мобильных операторах. И мы сегодня наблюдаем серьезную трансформацию мобильных операторов, которые предоставляют не только связь как таковую, коммуникацию между людьми и корпорациями как таковую, но они сегодня стали связующим звеном и в финансовом плане. Международная ассоциация GSM-операторов объединяет около 800 операторов во всем мире. Это не только крупнейшие международные компании. В большей степени можно говорить о так называемых мобильных экосистемах, которые включают в себя производители мобильных телефонов, программного обеспечения, интернет-компаний и так далее. Сайт Телеком.com называет ассоциацию GSM-операторов самой могущественной торговой организацией в мире с мощным лобби в правительствах по вопросам от налоговой политики до стратегии ценообразования. Нам кажется,
work on quite a lot of issues, starting from taxing to reforming of policy in the sphere. So that speaks for itself about the role of mobile operators in the world. And now I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Simone de Castri, Director on mobile regulation, and he'll speak about the provision of the role of financial inclusion.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me to both the Central Bank of Russia, of the Russian Federation, and the Alliance for Financial Inclusion. I'm glad we did a presentation, with the introduction, you didn't put any pressure on me. Thank you. I have to apologize in advance if my slides are not translated in Russian. This is not the fault of the organizers of this conference, of this workshop, but it's just because I really finalized the presentation this morning at 6, so there was no time, of course, to translate them, but I'm sure we can provide the translation later on to the participants. You will see that in many points there is an overlap between what John just presented and what I'm going to say. This is maybe because we talk too often and our thoughts are aligning, or maybe because, hopefully, because the two constituencies that we represent, the central banks, the financial sector regulators, and mobile network operators, which are the majority of the digital financial services providers around the world, the two constituencies are starting to see really the same context, the same trends. And this is probably something that will help us to build better partnerships and a more constructive dialogue between public and private sector, because it means that we can start really working on the same theory of change, bringing financial inclusion through digital and particularly through mobile. I will skip some of the slides that overlap more with what John said. And as the introduction that was very generous said, indeed the GSMA is the association that represents all mobile network operators around the world, and also some of the other companies that are working in the mobile ecosystem to really use mobile as a tool for socio-economic development all around the world. So the problem that we are facing is a global problem. Russia has different percentages of financial inclusion, but financial exclusion is a problem all over the world, from the countries, the most remote countries in Africa to the OECD countries. There is a problem of financial exclusion that particularly affects the low-income people, the people living in the rural areas, to a different extent, of course, depending on the economic development of the single country, but there's no country on the world that is not interested in financial inclusion and should not look at how innovation can cost-effectively, conveniently, and safely provide access to all the population to financial services. So the reason for financial exclusion is the different types. If you speak with people who don't use financial services, they will give different answers. But somehow we know the main problems. And these are the problems that I think we need to keep in mind all day long today, because each of our discussion, not to become theoretical, should always report to the point of where we really are thinking why a single person is not using the available financial services. And it can be because there is geographical exclusion. The entry points to the financial sector are too far. There are problems of cultural distance. Some of the financial sector providers are really designed and they brand their products for the mid-class, and so the poor people, the people in the rural area, don't feel comfortable engaging with these intermediaries. There are problems of design of the products. The chair that is in the picture is not comfortable. Nobody wants to sit on the chair, and nobody wants to use financial services that have been designed for a different scope and not really for the use of the people who are supposed to use it. and other problems. On top of these problems, now we have an opportunity. And I really believe in the power of photography and images. And this is the St. Peter's Square in Rome during the election of the last Pope in 2013 and during the election of the previous Pope in 2005. It's the same place, it's the same time, it's the same event. There is the same waiting for a moment that is historically and culturally interesting. What is changing is that everybody is looking at there is this on the top of the St. Peter, there is the white and the black signal to understand if there is a new Pope. Everybody is looking at the place through the screen of a mobile phone. Can be said sometimes, because people sometimes are more individually, but we see the opportunity. I think this is more powerful than any figure on the percentages of the diffusion of mobile phones today. However, we do have some of the figures, and the most important one is that there are, and that's, if you don't mind to click, there are 6.5 billion mobile connection around the world today. So this really makes an understanding what the great opportunities to leverage today the mobile for financial inclusion and for social and economic inclusion. Starting to go into the financial inclusion issues, the point is that we can really create ubiquity of the financial service, of the financial sector, and we can create conveniency. We need to bring down the cost of the provision of the services, and we need to bring down the cost of the financial products if we really want financial inclusion to happen. Save the fact that these products need to be secure, of course, and the financial sector must be stable and secure. So with the previous slides, with the use of the mobile phone and with the use of the agents, with the use of the ATM, combining all these tools that we have in order to reach proximity to the people, we can really bring down the cost of the financial sector outreach. Next. And this is something that is already happening. So in a few years, the first launch of a mobile money product was in 2001. M-Pesa, which is the biggest successful case, was launched in 2007. In only a few years, we have already more access points to digital financial services, and in particular to mobile money through agents, than what Western Union, the banking sector, has been able to build in decades. And this is because of the business model that really allows to build a safe but low-cost distribution system. So today we have an industry that has grown over the years all over around the world. We have 236 mobile money services in 88 countries. We are really grateful to the experience of Kenya, but today this is not only a Kenyan success, mobile money and digital financial services. This is a global phenomenon, and the fact that we are today in Russia talking about this is another proof of the relevance of this tool for financial inclusion. It's something that has been discussed in the G8. It's something that pretty much all the countries of the world are now interested in trying to understand how to use it best. So we see the growth in all the different regions of the world, and we see that really this opportunity is becoming successful in so many different countries. Next. As of today, actually as of July 2013, so today the figure is much better than this one. July 2013 is the last survey that we did. We are currently doing another global survey. We do that every year to understand the outreach of digital financial services, and we will publish the first data about this year very soon. But we have the data about June 2013 at the point that we're already 203 million registered accounts, mobile money accounts all around the world, and 61 million accounts that were used at least on a 90-day basis for a transaction. Now, this is a good result in a few years, and we see how big is the challenge really to scale the industry and to make usage something that people do daily. Next. And what is important is also that there are markets that are becoming more and more competitive. Most of the countries where there is mobile money are countries where there are at least 2 mobile money services or even 3 mobile money services. So there is a lot of competition, which is bringing down the cost, is creating more innovation, and is, most importantly, starting to create the opportunity and the context for interoperability, which becomes a key factor for scaling mobile money deployments and also for building a bigger ecosystem around mobile money, and something I will go back in the last slides. What does it mean that people are using mobile money? It means that they are starting to use this tool, their mobile device, for a range of basic transactional services, in particular transfer and payments. So they're starting to use their accounts to do peer-to-peer transactions, to receive bulk payments from big corporations, from their enterprises, from the governments who are more and more interested in moving to digital their welfare transfers. We see that now there is an increased usage for international remittances, for merchant payments. So at the beginning, mobile money is really about payments and transfers. That's the first use case. Can we move to the next slide? But we see also that in countries that are already more mature with experience of the digital financial services, these payments and transfer infrastructure is now where a bigger ecosystem is growing. So we have, on top of these mobile money services, the growing offer of savings, banking, insurance products, and beyond. We see innovation, more and more startups that are created because there is a very retail, low-cost digital payment infrastructure that they can leverage. This is the experience that we have from Kenya, where really we see all these new companies that are innovating and creating, taking the advantage of the existence of the digital financial system as it is today. And this one also, sorry, would you mind to go back a second? This one also tells us something important, and I'll go back there. It's, there is an opportunity for all financial sector providers. Because if we create a retail and low-cost infrastructure for transfers and payments, then the banks, the insurance providers, and the others can really offer their services more convenient, as John was saying, reaching out to people who were absolutely outside of their reach before with their traditional distribution system. The next. And again, this is not just happening in Kenya. This is an infographic about digital financial services in Tanzania. I think today Tanzania is probably the biggest world market in terms of value of the transactions. And it's in other countries where we see this revolution happening. And there are more. There are countries all over Africa, because Africa is really definitely the leading continent in terms of this innovation. But we see also countries in Latin America and countries in Asia doing the same. And recently we saw launches of mobile money products also in Europe. Romania is one of those. I know that other central banks in the Balkans area are discussing this, and there is an enabling regulatory environment in Europe through the European Directive also to allow the provision of these services. Next. From the regulatory point of view, the key elements to be considered are the elements around the business models that are allowed, AML, CFT regulations, which was mentioned before, the regulation for the distribution, the issues around taxation, interoperability. So there are different points where really the regulators is called to take responsibility to build a conducive regulatory environment that enables this innovation. Next. So just a few more slides. It will take me probably 3 or 4 minutes to conclude on the business models, because I think is the key starting point to understand how far this innovation can go if it can start. For us, what is very important in terms of consideration is that the business models are allowing competition and are allowing different models to be tested by different providers. So the fact that banks and non-banks can provide the mobile money services, we think is very important. And we think this because we have some evidence from the countries where this is happening already. So the main business models that we've seen around the world are models where the mobile network operators, the non-banks or the banks have been able to take different roles. However, this slide tells you clearly that the first truth about mobile money and regulation and the business models. There is always a bank and a mobile network operator involved, because you need a bank where the money sits, and we need a mobile network for the information about the payments, the transaction to go through. So this partnership, this collaboration is necessary. However, this collaboration can be very conducive or can be something that creates frictions around the development of the products. So the first two models are models where a non-bank takes a prominent role, and the third model is where a bank is taking a prominent role on the different functions that are necessary to develop. We see another model that is emerging recently, and if you can do one click, sorry. It's a model where there are payment banks, and this is something that has not been experienced yet, but is in some draft regulations, for example, in India. So we don't have yet information about the impact of these fourth business models, but it's something that we will see soon. Next. So what we see in terms of success is that based on the data that we gather every year, we see who is growing fast, who is not growing at all. And we see that the businesses, the providers that are growing fast, are mostly those where a non-bank is able to take more responsibility in the provision of the services. Those are the deployments in green. And this is quite evident from the data that we have, so that the business model number 1 and 2 are working better than the number 3. If we go to the next slide, we see that this data is confirmed over the years. So the previous data was about 2012, this is about 2013. This is a constant trend where the non-banks are really more successful in providing these payments and transfer services. Next. And we see that really, you can click until the end of this slide. I think it's another 2 clicks. Regulation really plays a role in this, because most of the markets still have a conservative regulation where this competition is not allowed, but financial inclusion and digital financial services are happening, another click, most prominently in the countries that have a regulation that allows for innovation and competition. So regulation, unfortunately, is really slowing down the development of digital financial services in many markets. Unfortunately, the countries where most of the population of the world lives. Next. So why this? When we saw this data, of course, we started to study why non-banks are so successful, and we see that there are peculiarities, and the peculiarities depend on the business model and incentives that they have to invest in these services. There are specific expertise that non-banks are bringing on, and in particular is their expertise in managing a retail distribution network. So there are countries such as Kenya where we have 100,000 mobile money agents. Now, you need to be Coca-Cola or Safaricom or Vodafone or Tigo or one mobile network operator in the world to be able to have a business plan ready to manage such a molecular, ubiquitous distribution. The traditional financial services providers are not used to manage that volume of distribution points. They manage branches in a very different way, and it's been difficult for them to do the shift to this new mentality on how to reach to the masses. And then there are incentives in terms of economic incentives because of the revenues. And in the case of mobile network operators, for example, they have a big portion of the revenue of the mobile money provider. It's something that only a mobile network operator can have. For example, because they're saving on churn. So they have specific economic incentives to invest in the development of these services. I will give you this slide, so I won't go in detail. I have, I think, only 2 or 3 more slides. Next. There are where the partnerships needs to be really commercially led and not with not too much how do you say, the regulator needs to leave space for the private sector to set up the partnership in the way they work better. Because we see from evidence from UN studies and from others that there are problems sometimes with these partnerships when there's no really freedom for a bank and mobile network operator to set it up in a way that is more convenient for the two business providers. Next. And we see that banks really find challenges, and that's also because their main revenues come from serving the middle class and from serving using credit products more than from managing high volumes and small value payment and transfer transactions. Next. So back to there, I don't want to say that when we say competition, it's important. Competition, it's a good thing. It's a great thing. It means that product providers can innovate and can find a way to use each other innovative approaches to offer more. So when I don't want to put in contrast the banking sector with the non-banks. We are talking just about this thin beginning of digital financial inclusion, when we see where mobile network operators and or banks are successful or not. That's the payment infrastructure. Again, on top of that infrastructure, banks can get revenues, microfinance institutions, insurance providers can really have, I don't like the way we say, but we have a bigger cake for all the providers to eat in terms of revenues, and we have a larger part of the population really can be served. Next and last one. Again, to put in perspective the discussion of today, the first most important thing for me is why people are excluded, why each single individual is not using the services that they have today, and the second is where do we want to go. And this is the final slide for this part of the presentation, which is we want to move to an ecosystem that at the global level is leveraging mobile phones. We want to move to the point where mobile phones are able to connect the kiosks, the ATM, the bank accounts, the insurance providers on a global scale. Somehow the way Visa is doing with the cards all around the world. I can pay with my card here in Russia, or I was paying there yesterday in London and on Monday in New York. The same must be with a mobile money account. It must be something that is portable, and it must be something that is convenient. So the issue of interoperability becomes key, and the issue of finding global common practices for the provision of the services all around the world, become very important to scale them. Thank you.
Simone, спасибо большое за
Simone, thank you very much for your presentation.
Очень понравился ваш слайд, на котором вы показали уровень конкуренции провайдеров мобильных финансовых услуг в отдельных регионах. Но я хотел бы здесь остановиться не на успехах Африки и Южной Америки, они очевидны. Я хотел бы сказать о том, сколь много еще нужно сделать для того, чтобы добиться такого уровня развития, соответственно, такого уровня конкуренции всем остальным. В Европе, Северной Америке и даже Азии. Как вы понимаете, Россия, к сожалению,
You're very well aware that Russia is in that gray sphere, and though we do quite a lot for financial inclusion, for digitalization, and for digital financial services, anyway, we've got to work very hard. Speaking about financial inclusion within the context of mobile financial services, we've got to say that they have quite a lot of advantages, and that is not physical access, which is very important, and that is actually a top priority, but very often that is simplicity and convenience for use, and that is the possibility for bringing down permanently the cost of the transactions. And from this particular standpoint, I'd like to draw the attention of the Russian colleagues that today, while creating the national payment system, or the system of national payment cards, and trying to compete with international providers of plastic cards, we have a unique opportunity to introduce a unique component to this particular task, and we can really make a huge step forward. On the one hand, that is quite an ambitious task, but on the other hand, if you do not set such high goals, it is very difficult to be in the vanguard in such a sphere, in such a huge country as Russia. We have just 5 minutes and we stick to our schedule, and if there are any people who are willing to ask a question, our colleagues will respond. Alexey Lvovich, please, your question. Thank you very much, Alexey Svatyukin. I'd like to thank the Bank of Russia for the organization of such a timely and topical seminar, and I'd like to thank all the speakers for their very interesting presentations and for the information about what is happening in the world. But my question is about Russia. Sergey Anatolyevich spoke about certain mental and technological barriers. He spoke about cybercrime, and that is very important. But there are certainly regulatory barriers which are created actually by federal laws and instructions of regulators. And one of such barriers in Russia is Law 115, that is anti-money laundering law, and the law against the financing of terrorism. And certainly we should not overlook that, and certainly we've got to set an obstacle for terrorists and for money laundering. But sometimes these barriers relate not only to terrorists but to just law-abiding citizens. And one of such barriers is a very high threshold for the identification of the client, both for physical persons and legal entities. And this threshold is even higher than in the developing countries, and it is higher than the VATF recommendations. So what would you say to this? Well,
indeed, our analysis shows that Law 115 may become a very significant obstacle for the development of services, and now we have all these issues in the focus of our negotiations of the central bank and Rosfin monitoring, and I think that we have quite achieved a progress, and we understand that protocol with our partners, and I think that we'll have all the chances to improve our legislation in the spring of this year, of the next year. So now we're finalizing the text of the respective amendments, and I think that the client identification will be simpler, so that will open up the road for all the rest. I hope everything will be okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. I have a question to Simone. Two questions, actually. Simone, could you give examples, maybe of a specific country or average statistics, the difference between the cost of transfer transactions that is done by the mobile operator, the transfers made by the bank, but using a mobile device? That is my first question. And my second question is, I think that when you spoke about mobile operators and when you said that they may be analogs of banking institutions, did you have a certain amount, certain threshold for the amount to be transferred? So what amount could not actually have any risks for the mobile operator to transfer it without having a banking license? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very good questions. So to tackle the first one, if a bank is providing a mobile money service or a mobile network operator through a subsidiary, most often is providing a mobile money service, so whoever is the mobile money provider, I don't think there is a difference in the cost of the product at the end of the transfer. Probably the cost is very, very, very similar in most of the cases. The difference is the availability of the product and the type of the product. So in most cases, banks design products that are tied to a bank account, and therefore you have all the problems of bank account opening, say KYC, for example, since we were just talking about this very critical point. While mobile money providers and non-mobile banking providers, mobile money providers open mobile wallets which have a different opening cost and different regulations and different compliance requirements. For example, because mobile money wallets have very limited transactionality. So there are limits in the balance that you can keep in your wallet. There are limits on the daily or monthly or weekly transfers in terms of both volumes and values. So that's where the difference is. So I think the cost for, if I I will leave it to Steve then to correct me if I'm wrong, but if I'm a Kenyan with a mobile money wallet and a mobile banking account, probably I can transfer money from both. But the problem is that most people are only able to open the mobile money wallet because that's what they are offered. And the problem is that also the challenge is that you need to build this distribution network to make these services available. And that's where we see really a different interest and incentive systems and success between banks and non-banks providers. So the fact that they really are able to reach out to the rural areas, to the less served areas with this low-cost distribution network. The second question, The amounts. It really depends from country to country and from the risk appetite of the regulator. So it's the regulator in most cases that is setting the limits. In some countries, the regulator is leaving to the providers to set the transactional limits for the accounts, and then the regulator is approving them. I think that we are entering a new era for AML-CFT. And that's since the FATF approved the new recommendation with Principle 1 asking countries to do a risk-based approach, a risk-based assessment and take a proportional approach. So this is creating a new opportunities for all the countries. All countries should really do the risk assessment of the single different products, and we have a session on risk where we'll go a little bit more in details about this risk assessment for AML-CFT. But based on that and based on also on the context of the country, I think the limits should be set up. We do have on our website some tables where we compare the transactional limits of wallets in different countries, and we see a great discrepancy. There are countries where people can transact $20 maximum per transaction, and countries where they can transact up to $500, $600. The value of $1 in each country is different. So in these tables, you can also find the figures adjust to purchasing poverty power of the dollars in the different countries, but still we see discrepancies there. It also depends on whether countries have a simplified, allow for simplified account opening, and so often you see different tiers where people with who are not don't have a government issued ID, they have access to a simplified account with limited transactionality, and people who can prove their identity and address with their passport or with an ID card, they can access to a wallet that is with a full KYC and therefore with more transactionality.
Симона, спасибо. Уважаемые коллеги, время нашей сессии вышло. Если кто-то не успел задать вопросы, прошу не расстраиваться, потому что у нас еще 4 интересных сессии, в рамках которых вы также сможете выяснить все вас интересующее. Плюс к этому нас ждет несколько перерывов. Как вы понимаете, в первую очередь перерыв нужен для того, чтобы пообщаться с коллегами, и только во вторую очередь для того, чтобы выпить чашечку кофе. Я хотел бы еще один раз поблагодарить всех выступающих сегодня на сессии. Это Сергея Швецова, это Джона Оуэнса и Симона де Кастро. Спасибо, уважаемые коллеги, за ваше выступление. Давайте поблагодарим аплодисментами. И до встречи в 11 часов. Спасибо.